This is lesson 5.1, dividing whole numbers. This is page 107. And page 107 is an Explorer activity. It's mostly actually estimating. We're going to estimate quotients by doing some rounding. These numbers are gigantic, and so I'm going to help you with it. And it's really not, it's not super hard. But if the numbers are overwhelming to you, I'm going to help you. So let's go ahead and go through this page together real quick. Explorer activity, estimating quotients. You can use estimation to predict the quotient of multi-digit whole numbers. So this problem is going to be about a zoo. We're going to read it real quick. A local zoo had a visitor of 98,464 visitors last year. The zoo was open every day except for 3 holidays. It's pretty important to recognize that there's 3 days it wasn't open. So except for 3 holidays. On average, about how many visitors did the zoo have each day? When we get a question that's worded about, that means we can round. We don't need to do this exact calculation. We're going to do about. So A reads, to estimate the average number of visitors per day, you can divide the total number of visitors by the number of days. To estimate the quotient, first estimate the dividend by rounding the number of visitors to the nearest 10,000. 98,464 rounded to the nearest 10,000 is blank. So some kids I've noticed in the past need a little bit of help with their rounding skill. So what I do is when I teach this, you have to read carefully what place we're supposed to round to. We're supposed to round to the nearest 10,000. So you go to the 10,000s place and then you look to the right. And if the number to the right is 5 or greater, you round up. Well, 8's above 5, so you round up. That 9 actually rounds up to a 10, and then everything after that remains a 0. So 98,000 rounds up to 100,000. And that should make sense. 98,464 rounds up to about 100,000. If you thought that the answer was either 99,000 or 98,000, then you're rounding to the nearest 1,000, not the nearest 10,000. Let's move on to question B. There were 365 days last year. How many days was the petting zoo open? We know that it was open every day except for the 3 holidays. So if we subtract 3 from 365, we get 362. And then on question C, we're going to round that. Estimate the divisor by rounding the number of days that the zoo was open to the nearest 100. So 362 rounds to, we're rounding to the nearest 100, so you underline that number in the hundreds place. It's a 3. You look to the right. 6 rounds up, so it makes that 3 round to a 4, and then everything turns to a 0, so it's about 400. D says to estimate the quotient. That means 100,000 divided by 400. Now this looks more complicated than it really is. I'm going to show you how it actually can be kind of easy. Do you remember back from Module 3, we taught you that a division problem can become a fraction. The first term, the dividend, is the numerator. So I'm going to put 100,000 over the second term is the denominator. So I'm going to put that over 400. And I'm going to show you a visual on how simple it is to simplify. If I divide by 10, these zeros would cancel. And if I divide by 10 again, these zeros would cancel. All that's left is, how many times does 4 go into 1,000? And if you're not sure about that, you could just ask yourself, how many times does 4 go into 100? And that's 25, and then you annex the 0, it makes 250. Now, I'm going to prove that to you. We're going to check our work now when we get to the bottom on the reflect number 1. I'm going to prove that. If you're not positive that I made that computation correct, I'll prove it to you that I did. It says, question D, or the follow-up question says, the average number of visitors per day last year was about 250. Now, if you wanted to know if this were close, you could just go ahead and punch it into a calculator, and I'd be okay with that. If you don't do that, you might be curious. If you actually punched in 98,464 divided by 362, all we need to do is get close to about 250. 272, I say that's close enough, which we rounded, we estimated, we got 250. About 250 is close enough to 272, then I feel that we did a good job of rounding. Let's go ahead and check out the bottom of the page. So the reflect says, how can you check that your quotient is correct? Well, I would estimate again, but I would estimate using multiplication. And I can show you how to do that in just a second. Estimate using multiplication. And what you're going to do with multiplication is you're simply going to multiply your answer, which is 250, by 400. and we need it to be about 100,000. And this again looks more complicated than it is. I ignore all these zeros. I'll count them up later and they'll become part of my answer, but I ignore all these zeros and I just multiply my digits 4 times 25. And if I just do 4 times 25, I get 100. And then I count all these zeros that I ignored and I annex them to the end of 100. There's 1, 2, 3, so I annex 3 more zeros. And the answer is 100,000, which is what we knew it to be. We divided 100,000 by 250, we got 400. So then we work backwards and we multiply 250 by 400, we should get 100,000, which we did. Alright, question 2, critical thinking. Do you think that your estimate is greater than or less than the actual answer, and explain? Well, we already checked our actual answer and it's probably still on my calculator. No, it's not. The actual answer was 98,464 divided by 365. And the actual answer was, I punched it in wrong, it was 98,464 divided by 362, and we get 272. So the actual answer was 272. Our estimate was 250. So our estimate was lower. So it says, do you think that your estimate is greater than or less than? So I'm going to say less than, and it says why, or it says explain. And there's a very clear reason why. If we round up, which we did, do you remember that the number should have been, when we divided by 360, we divided by 400, but the number was, we should have divided by 362, but we divided by 400. We rounded up. And if you round up, it actually means your estimate would be too low, and the opposite of that would also be true. If we rounded down, it means our estimate would be too high. So for number 2, our estimate is less than the actual answer because we rounded up. Okay, we are done with page 107 using estimation to predict quotients. Now, when we go into page 108, we're actually going to be doing some long division.